Hello, and welcome to the webinar on what is new in taxatsource on dividends. My name is Lauri Havia, and I will be your host today. We are pleased to see we have so many participants all over the world today with us here. I would like to start out with some practicalities. You have the opportunity to send questions through the chat box. We probably do not have time to answer all the questions during the webinar, but don't worry, all of them will be answered, and we will send you a document with all the questions and answers afterwards. This webinar will also be recorded and made available online. Our agenda for today is divided in 4 parts. First, we have updated instructions for filling in the application form and enclosures. Then we have new form, and after that, update on potential legislative changes regarding nominee-registered shares. And finally, in the end, we have questions and answers. We have 2 presenters today. We have Samir Abdoon and Emma Pulkkinen from Southern Finland Corporate Tax Office. Also, we have a guest, Katja Pussila, from Large Taxpayers Office. So, without further ado, let's welcome our first presenter on stage, Samir Abdoon. So, welcome Samir. I leave you with the presentation.
Hello. As Lauri already mentioned, my name is Samir Abdoon. I work in the Finnish tax administration with international corporate taxation. So, today I will talk to you about the updated instructions for filling in the application form 6163E and the enclosure 6167E. Okay, so first of all, about sending your application. The address, you can find it on the form on the left right corner. And if it's needed, you can also deliver the application to any office of the Finnish tax administration. For example, we have the registry at the address Väksyntie 4, Helsinki. This street address of the registry, you can also use it for the courier service. Remember, when using the courier service, you will also want to write down the PO box address. Please remember to refrain from using reclaim processor names in the address field when sending your application. Also, make sure to have the QR coded application as the first page of your application. And it is to be noted that if you have several 6163 forms, you must enclose all relevant attachment to each 6163 forms. Okay. So, concerning the dividend vouchers and receipts, there has been a brief period where they were not mandatory enclosures, but as of now, they are mandatory. So always put them in your application. In addition of the dividend vouchers, we may ask you to present, first of all, the full audit trail. The full audit trail is the chain of dividend vouchers which show the flow of payment from the payer through financial intermediaries to the applicant. And secondly, there is also the proof of purchase which we may ask you to present. Concerning the depository receipts, or the ADRs, the American Depository Receipts, the dividend vouchers in these cases should always be addressed to the holder of the ADR. And also it should indicate that the dividend has been paid based on the depository receipt shares. And it is always to be noted that the refunds are always paid in euros, regardless of what currency the dividend was paid to the applicant. And lastly, make sure to write all amounts in euros on the application form. So some other modifications we have on the form. There is the 5.1 concerning the direct shareholding through a fund or through a partnership. There you also have to attach a free format clarification on how many units or how many shares of the fund or partnership the applicant owns. Another point that has been updated is the 5.8 concerning the parent subsidiary directive. So in the case your application is based on the EU's European Union's parent subsidiary directive, you should always enclose a document from the payer showing how much dividend the paying company's capital the applicant held on the dividend record date. Furthermore, the point 5.16 concerning the intermediary banks. As an example, we have, for example, Bank C that pays the dividend to the beneficiary, which is the applicant. The Bank C has received the dividend from the foreign custodian Bank B. Bank B has received the dividend from the Finnish custodian Bank A, which has made the payment on behalf of the dividend-paying company. In field 5.16, the applicant must provide the names of all the intermediary banks that have been with the process. So in the exemplary case, we would have the name of the Bank A, the Bank B, and finally the Bank C. I will show you a picture concerning the example. So here we have, for example, the Finnish payer, which is in the example, it's Nokia. Then we have the Finnish custodian bank, and the foreign custodian bank, and the applicant's bank. And then, of course, naturally, we have the applicant. So in the part 5.16, the applicant needs to write down the Finnish custodian bank, the foreign custodian bank, and lastly the applicant's bank. Also, don't forget, if your request is based on the applicant being a comparable to a tax-exempt Finnish organization, you must enclose these two documents to the application. First of all, an explanation of the circumstances that make it possible for the applicant to be seen as a comparable to a tax-exempt Finnish organization. Secondly, you have the form 6161E, which is the certificate of tax treatment concerning dividends, or another document issued by the country of residence establishing that the Finnish taxatsource cannot be fully credited in your country of residence. For example, when the applicant is applying for a refund based on the applicant being comparable to a Finnish investment fund, the explanation should contain a detailed description on how the applicant is comparable to this Finnish investment fund. Lastly, but not least, this is a list of examples that show the type of information we are looking for concerning the investment funds. So we have, for example, how is the investment fund managed? Who is the fund's custodian or the one that holds all the fund's assets? Who owns the fund's assets? How is the value of the fund shares calculated? Who can invest in the fund? How does the investor buy and sell the fund shares? Is the fund supervised by government officials? How is the fund and its shareholders or unit holders taxed in the domicile country? Is the fund in question open-ended with variable capital, or is it a close-ended fund? The legal act under which the investment fund is established. And lastly, the rules under which the investment fund is established concerning contractual funds, trusts, or company bylaws. Description of the entity form used for the collective investment scheme in question. Okay, so that is all from my part. Next in line will be my colleague Emma Pulkkinen, and I wish you happy holidays. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and good afternoon and good morning to our colleagues across the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm here to tell you today about the new Form 6211E for taxatsource card applications. But before I go into this issue, I just wanted to point out that if you have any questions regarding Samir's presentation, make sure to put them down in the chat, and we'll try and answer all the questions towards the end in the Q&A section. But also remember that if we do not answer all questions during this webinar, that we will be sending a Q&A document to you afterwards. But let's get started with the taxatsource card. So what is a taxatsource card? I know this is quite a common thing for many of you, or you already know what this is, but I thought it might be a good idea for some of our listeners to go through what the taxatsource card actually is. So the taxatsource card is a paper card that can be presented to the Finnish payer before the income is paid. So as you know, many Finnish payers pay dividend in the spring. So if you were able to give the taxatsource card to them before the dividend is actually paid, they can already withhold the correct amount when paid. There's also the possibility of using the taxatsource card for the quick refund process. So even if the dividend has already been paid out, you can go to your custodian bank and they can, through this quick refund process, use the taxatsource card so that you get your refund basically during the payment year. In both of these cases, this would allow you not to have to apply for a refund from the Finnish tax administration afterwards. So it can be quite useful in some cases, and I would especially recommend this for any of you who already have a positive refund decision from previous year. And you can attach that, for example, to your application. But I'll go into the details a bit more when we look at the form itself. Now here's the new form. Please write down the form number 6211E. So this has changed. Previously we had the form 6202A. And I would really recommend that you start using this new form, as this will make the process a lot smoother and swifter. And we ask a lot of information on this new form that is really useful and allows us to, quicker process your application. So the new form is only for dividend, interest, and royalty income. There are some considerations to take into account now that this is a QR-coded form. but many of you are already familiar with our refund application form 6163E. So just make sure to take those same considerations when sending the tax at source card application. So for example, please don't cover or surround the QR code with any sort of text or other markings. Now, the tax at source card itself is actually issued in all 3 languages. The same card will be in Finnish, Swedish, and English. However, we would ask you to choose the language of the form based on which language you wish to receive any possible information requests in. So if you want us to send you an information request in English, please choose the English form. Now, as a rule, the tax at source card is issued for the current calendar year. So if you're thinking of applying for next year, we would ask you to write down as the validity period the 1st of January 2019 to the 31st of December 2019. Now, what do you need to attach to the application itself? So when you're applying for a tax at source card for dividend, interest, or royalty income, please attach the following. So a certificate of residence, which is issued by the local officials in the country of domicile, and it has to be for the payment year in question. There may be some exceptions that we can take into consideration, but please be in contact with us if you have any questions regarding this. There are, and as I say on the slide, there are also exceptional circumstances where some other registration document from local officials will also be accepted. This will especially apply to investment funds because many of them only get a UCITS attestation, for example. We also need a detailed description of the grounds the application is based on. This is especially important, and it's basically a free format text writing why you're applying for the tax at source card and what it's based on. And then if the applicant is represented by an agent, we also ask you to attach a power of attorney. Now, there are a few points in the form that I kind of want to bring out. So section 2, which is based on the agent. If you want the tax at source card to be sent to the agent instead of yourself, we would ask you to tick yes in field 2.2. This allows us to, send it to the correct place. Often we have sent it, for example, straight to the client because it's been unclear who the card should be sent to. Then point 3.3. So if the entity has received a tax at source card or a refund earlier, you should indicate whether there have been any changes in the circumstances as presented earlier. And there's basically a yes or no answer to this. If there have been some changes, we would ask you to provide a detailed description of what the changes are. So from this question, you can already see that there is the possibility to kind of indicate that you already have a previous tax at source card or a previous refund decision. This will make the process a lot smoother, as you will be able to show basically that it's already been, the question itself has been answered, and if there has been no change to the circumstances, it's a pretty straightforward process of issuing the card for the next year. Then point 3.6 and 3.7, so what the grounds for the application are. As I said earlier, you should attach a free format explanation of why you're applying. But in addition to this, we ask you to check one of the boxes in point 3.6. So basically whether your application is based on a tax treaty or perhaps EU legislation. Then we also ask you to inform us what rate, tax at source rate, you are actually applying for. So in this field 3.7, we expect you to fill in a number. So if you're, for example, applying for a tax exemption, we would ask you to write 0 in the field. Now, there's some additional guidance for umbrella funds because we understand that they're sort of a special group when it comes to our applicants. Typically, we issue the tax at source card for the main fund. So we also ask that you fill in the application in the name of the main fund. However, there are, of course, exceptions based on the market where the umbrella fund is conducting its business. So as a guideline, please fill in the application in the name of the entity that receives the certificate of residence. Now, the actual instructions are already online. I would really recommend that you familiarize yourself with the online instructions where we go by the form point by point. But of course, if there's any questions or any uncertainties, we ask you to contact us, and we'll go through the contact details towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so now I think it's time for us to move to the next section of our presentation. And I'm actually going to invite our guest to come and talk with me a little bit about this update on a potential legislative change regarding nominee-registered shares. So my guest may be familiar to many of you already. Her name is Katja Pussila, and she works at the Large Taxpayers Office. And she's actually been involved in a project related to this upcoming potential legislative change. So without further ado, please welcome Katja.
Hello, Emma.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I think just to start, I have a slide here basically showing a kind of key points of what we're going to talk about today. But just to start, when we talk about this potential change, legislative change regarding nominee-registered shares, what are we talking about?
Well, basically the background of the possible change is actually with the EU CSD regulation, because when it was, when the CSD regulation came, we kind of, or the Minister of Finance realized that there might be need for a change regarding the tax rules, so that we would be prepared to the time when the world is different. So basically where there can be issuance through different CSDs than the national Finnish CSD. So basically it's the idea is to get ready for the future.
Okay. Are there any specific, what legislation does this actually affect?
Well, it's actually regarding the Act on the Taxation of Non-Residents.
Okay.
So basically the idea is regarding the withholding taxation of dividends paid to non-residents whose shares are nominee registered.
Okay. What is actually the current status of the government proposal at the moment?
Yeah, the proposal was given to the Parliament just recently. The Parliament hasn't yet voted on it, so it's still in a proposal phase, and therefore we are actually not yet competent authority to discuss about the proposal, because it's not an approved legislation yet. So basically once if the proposal is approved by the Parliament, then we are going to give you a much more thorough guidance regarding the changes, and then we are going to host completely separate webinar regarding the legislative change itself and go through it step by step.
Okay, so now we just have to wait to see what our government or our Parliament is going to vote.
Yes, exactly. And we are estimating that this could happen somewhere in the spring. So maybe the webinar could be hosted maybe around April or May, depending on the schedule of the Parliament.
Okay. Now, if it is passed, when do you expect these changes to come into effect?
Yeah, well, the new regime would be applied to dividends paid in 2021. So basically there is time, there is still time. So basically 2019 and 2020, the current system would be still applied.
Okay.
For non-residents.
Now, I kind of want to get into some of the content of the proposal. One of the larger suggested changes involves OECD trace model.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit more about trace?
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm most excited about with this change, because Finland is actually going to implement the OECD trace. And trace stands for Treaty Relief and Compliance Enhancement, which basically is a standardized system for having the treaty benefits at source for portfolio investments. So basically we will be implementing trace.
Okay.
And the important areas of the trace implementation package is actually the role of the authorized intermediary. So in Finland, you can act as an authorized intermediary or as a contractual intermediary. The issuer is still the main or the primary withholding tax agent. So basically, we won't have a tax agent system. We will have the role of the authorized intermediary and the role of contractual intermediary. So basically, what responsibilities the authorized intermediary will have is reporting responsibilities and tax liability for the information they have provided.
Okay. Is there any sort of public information already that our viewers can go and check?
Yeah. The implementation package is already published by OECD.
Yeah.
You can find it from the OECD webpage. Just to Google OECD TRACE implementation package, and you should find it. The TRACE schema, which is the technical form of how authorized intermediaries give the reports to the tax administration, the schema itself has not been published by OECD. So, but to give you a brief idea what it looks like, actually the CRS schema, so the Common Reporting Standard schema, and the DAC2 schema are actually based on TRACE schema. So if you do, as a financial institution, you do CRS reporting, the TRACE reporting is very similar.
Okay, so quite familiar it will be for many of our
Probably,
viewers.
yeah, at least it should be in that sense.
Yeah.
And the idea actually is with the new regime that all the intermediaries in the chain can register to the authorized intermediary register.
Oh,
So that's the biggest difference for the current system, where we have this custodian register, where actually only the first foreign custodian within the chain can register. So in the future, all the intermediaries in the chain can register as authorized intermediary and give their privileged client info directly to us.
Okay.
Yeah, because one of the concerns with the international stakeholders with the current system has been that they need to provide the privileged customer information to the chain, and they don't always want to do that. So in the future, instead of giving the information through the chain, they can provide it directly to us by using the TRACE schema.
Okay, now that you mentioned this authorized intermediary register, what's the kind of time frame? When would this be in force?
Yeah, well, you can start to register 6 months prior to when the law will be applied. So basically, you can register starting from 1st of July 2020.
Okay. And when can our viewers expect some guidance on this matter?
Well, if everything goes as planned and the Parliament votes within a few months, we are estimating that we would be able to give the first drafts of guidance in the autumn 2019.
Okay.
So rather quickly, I would say.
Now, I have still a few questions on this issue. Could you tell me a little bit more about this investment self-declaration?
Yeah, investor self-declaration.
Yes, that's right.
So basically, it's a declaration given by the investor, so basically the beneficiary, where they state their tax status, and you can apply it as an authorized intermediary instead of demanding for certificate of tax residence. So you, instead of requesting the certificate of tax residence, you can request an investor self-declaration, and if all the information is in line with the other information that you have of your customer, you can provide treaty benefits based on the ESD.
Okay, so in addition to, for example, the certificate of residence and taxatsource cards, we could start receiving these investor self-declarations as well. Okay.
And that's one of the areas where there's a lot of information in the TRACE implementation package regarding. There are also models of the ESDs that you can apply.
What about, I've also heard of this independent review. Is this going to also come to Finland?
Actually, no.
Okay.
So independent review is part of the TRACE, but there won't be any independent review in Finland.
Okay. Now, how will we involve the financial actors in this whole process?
Yes, we definitely want to involve the international stakeholders as well. The official hearings regarding the guidance that we give are held in Finnish and Swedish because they are the official languages. But we definitely want to involve all the international actors in this field to the process. We want to hear what kind of guidance you would like to have. If there are any issues that you would like us to address in the guidance, please tell us. So we definitely are interested in your views, because the system only works if the intermediaries in the chain start to register. One thing that I want to point out is that this new regime is actually optional. So you can continue doing the way you are doing. However, the current so-called simplified procedure with the custodian register, that will no longer be an option starting from 2021. So basically, but we are going to go through this more thoroughly with examples in the webinar that we are going to host in the spring when we are competent authorities.
Yeah, and
if the legislation passes.
Exactly, and then we'll also be into maybe like drafting some guidance, and at that point we'll also probably want to hear from our financial actors what kind of guidance they want from us.
Definitely.
Okay, then I have just one more question for you. How can our listeners stay informed about these upcoming changes?
I think the best way is actually to subscribe the newsletter for the financial sector, which is available in English. So you can subscribe it from our website, and the newsletter is not just for this legislative change. It always has other content as well, but that will be the main forum where we will give this information about what's going on. We are going to give you the current status of the guidance, etc. And so if you subscribe the newsletter, you will be informed.
Yeah, and I think maybe a lot of our viewers today have come through the invitation that we sent with this newsletter.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, do we have some instructions also or information on tax.fi?
Yes, actually we have a new web page inside of the tax.fi. So basically we have a new website for the actors in the financial sector, and it's actually a web page where all the relevant information is gathered in one place. So basically all the actors in the financial sector should be able to find the guidance they need from one page. Instead of browsing around the tax.fi, they can just go in to the webpage of financial sector and find the guidance from there. And once we are competent authorities, so if the legislation passes, we are going to launch like a site. We're going to publish all the relevant information regarding the legislative change also in the webpage for the financial sector.
Great. Sounds like a great idea that it's all in one place.
Yeah, that's the idea, to make it more easier to find the information. So you always know that you have the current status, that you have access to knowledge, basically. Exactly. That's the idea behind it.
And easy to find.
Yeah, and it's also in English.
Yes.
Yeah. So there might be some instructions that aren't yet translated into English, but we are working on it, and we are going to try to provide as many guidance in English as possible. But all the guidance regarding the change will be published in English as well.
Great.
And the webinar that we are going to host in the spring won't be the only one. We are going to host webinars rather frequently within the upcoming years.
Yeah, because it's a big change.
It's a big change, and I'm sure that people listening are full with questions about what's actually going to happen, and we are definitely going to keep you informed and give you all the guidance in English as soon as we are competent authorities and can have the discussions regarding what the change actually means.
Well, great. Thank you, Katja. That was my last question.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, I thank you, and I think next we're going to move on to the Q&A section.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. Okay, Lauri, do you have some questions for me?
Yes, thank you, Emma. Yeah, we received a lot of good questions, and we have some for you now. So, the first question is, when do vouchers become mandatory again?
Okay, so there's probably been a bit of confusion here because there was, a stage where they weren't mandatory, but yes, they are now mandatory from this moment. We've updated the instructions for the form online. And I just want to kind of point out that even when they weren't mandatory, the Finnish tax administration always had the opportunity to ask for these vouchers anyways.
Yes, okay, great. And we have also a second question here.
Mm-hmm.
So we have been using an older version of the form 6163E. Is that a problem? So what would you answer to that?
So the main problem is if you've been using a form that does not have the QR code, because basically this is now mandatory, that you should be using a form that has the QR code on it. If you're using an older version of the QR coded form, it's not necessarily that big of an issue. The only issue is then that there might be information on the newer version that we have to then request afterwards. However, I think the latest version of the form was published in 2017, so hopefully our viewers have already taken it on board.
Yeah, so it's easier for the applicant to use the newest form.
That's right. It really makes the process a lot smoother and quicker.
Yes. Okay. So, what is the statute of limitation for sending in applications?
Okay, so there's been a bit of a change. Last year, the statute of limitation was changed from 5 years to 3 years. But the new 3-year deadline actually only applies to dividends paid in 2017 and after that. Yeah. So the statute of limitation this year, this year is the last year to apply for dividends paid in 2013.
Okay.
And basically, this means that if you still need to apply for those dividends, that your application has to arrive at the Finnish tax administration by the 31st of December 2018.
Okay, so still a little bit.
There's still a little bit of time.
Yeah. But hurry up if you have
exactly.
Forms coming. Yes, so then the next question is, when can I send in an application for a taxatsource card for the year 2019? So next year.
Well, like I said, the taxatsource cards are made for the calendar year. So basically, you can already start sending the applications for 2019. Yeah. So we're now already starting to slowly process the applications for next year. And I really recommend that, you start sending your applications soon because dividends are then paid out, in the spring. So it's a good idea to get started on that.
Yeah, so the taxatsource card is ready on time.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So if I have a previous taxatsource card, what do I need to attach to the application then?
So basically it is the same documents kind of that you would for a new taxatsource card application. But I think, for example, the grounds for your application, you don't necessarily have to go into as much detail. So then it's enough if you just tick on the form that there have been no changes to the circumstances. And it's always a good idea to attach the previous taxatsource card so we can straight away see, they have a previous taxatsource card. But there is a mandatory enclosure always, and that is the certificate of residence. So regardless of whether you have a previous taxatsource card, we still need the certificate of residence for that year. Okay. But like I said before, there are some exceptional circumstances where the applicant doesn't get a certificate of residence, for example.
Okay, great. Well, how can I contact you with any further questions if something arises?
Yeah, well, like Katja was saying earlier, we already have the new website, and actually these emails are also listed on the new financial sector website as well. So basically, we have a group email for the refunds of Finnish withholding tax on dividend, interest, and royalty income. However, I would like to stress that this group email is for corporate clients only. So if it's a question regarding the taxation of an individual client, then we do not handle those questions. And I would also like to point out that if you have a question regarding taxatsource cards, that you can also send it to this WHT reclaims at vero.fi.
Okay.
But in addition to that, now that we have this potential legislative change coming up, we have opened a new group email for the financial sector. So financial sector at vero.fi.
Okay.
So they can also use that if need be. However, I would like to point out that both of these emails are meant for general guidance. So please don't send applications or anything like that.
Okay. So keep with the procedures given in the
Exactly.
application form and in the web page.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, that was the last question we have. Thank you, Emma, very much for
Thank you, Lauri.
your great answers. I'm sure we all learned a lot. Yes.
Thank you.
And that's all we've got for today. Thank you all for joining. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact us through the channels already just mentioned. The presentation material is already available online. The link will be sent to the registered participants. Furthermore, we will compile a document with questions and answers sent to us during the webinar, and that will also be uploaded online. Registered participants will receive a message when the document has been uploaded. Please note that this webinar will be made available on YouTube, ready to watch starting tomorrow. So make sure to check our YouTube channel for other interesting videos. Thank you all for watching. From all of us here at the Tax Administration, happy holidays.